For most of human history, having children was not just considered a personal choice. It was a fundamental part of life. Families were large, communities were built around generations living together, and having children was often viewed as a natural continuation of adulthood. Across cultures and civilizations, raising the next generation was one of the most important responsibilities a person could have. But something unusual is happening in the modern world. Birth rates are falling across almost every developed nation, and an increasing number of people are choosing not to have children at all. This shift is so dramatic that some countries are now facing population decline, aging societies, and concerns about the future of their economies. Governments are offering financial incentives, tax benefits, and public campaigns encouraging people to have more children. Yet despite these efforts, many people continue making the same decision. They do not want to become parents. For decades, society assumed that people naturally wanted children and that declining birth rates were simply caused by financial problems that could be solved with enough support. But the reality is far more complicated. The reasons behind this global transformation reveal something much deeper about modern life itself. People are not just having fewer children because they cannot afford them. They are questioning whether parenthood fits into the kind of life they want to build. They are reconsidering traditional expectations about adulthood, success, happiness, and personal freedom. The decline of childbirth is not simply a demographic change. It is a reflection of a civilization undergoing one of the biggest cultural transformations in human history. To understand why fewer people want children, we first have to understand how dramatically human priorities have changed. For thousands of years, survival depended heavily on family size. Children were not only emotional connections, but also essential contributors to the household. In agricultural societies, more children often meant more workers who could help maintain farms and support the family economy. There was no retirement system, no modern healthcare, and no guarantee that outside institutions would provide support during old age. Having children was part of a survival strategy. But modern society has fundamentally changed that equation. Children are no longer economic contributors in the same way. Instead, raising a child has become one of the largest financial commitments a person can make. Education, healthcare, housing, childcare, transportation, and everyday expenses can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars over a lifetime. At the same time, the benefits that once encouraged larger families have weakened. People no longer depend on children for labor or guaranteed support in old age. The relationship between parent and child has transformed from an economic necessity into an emotional decision. This means people now ask a question previous generations rarely had the freedom to consider. Do I truly want this? And once people have the ability to question a tradition rather than simply follow it, many begin making different choices. The decline in birth rates is therefore not only about fewer children being born. It is about the rise of individual choice in a world where people have more control over their own lives than ever before. One of the biggest factors influencing this decision is economics. Raising children has become increasingly expensive at the exact same time that many young adults feel financially insecure. Housing costs have exploded in many major cities. Wages have struggled to keep pace with inflation. Student debt has increased. Job markets have become more competitive and uncertain. For many people, adulthood no longer follows the traditional path it once did. Previous generations often moved out, bought homes, married, and had children relatively early. Today, many young adults spend their 20s and even 30s trying to achieve basic financial stability. They are not necessarily rejecting the idea of children. They are looking at their circumstances and wondering whether they can realistically provide the life they believe a child deserves. Parenthood today often comes with extremely high expectations. Many people feel pressure to provide not just food and shelter, but the perfect childhood experience. They want safe neighborhoods, quality education, extracurricular activities, emotional support, and countless opportunities. The standard for being a good parent has become incredibly demanding. As a result, some people decide that unless they can offer an ideal environment, they would rather not become parents at all. This creates a paradox. Modern society has become wealthy enough that people can provide more for children than ever before, yet those same expectations have made parenthood feel more overwhelming and financially impossible. The decision not to have children is often not about selfishness or lack of care. For many, it comes from the belief that bringing a child into the world creates a responsibility they are not confident they can fulfill. Another major shift is the changing role of women in society. For most of history, women had limited control over education, careers, finances, and reproductive choices. Motherhood was often considered the primary path available to women, whether they personally desired it or not. But over the last century, women have gained unprecedented independence. They can pursue careers, higher education, financial freedom, and personal goals that previous generations could rarely imagine. This transformation is one of the greatest social changes in human history. However, it also created a conflict between traditional expectations and modern opportunities. Many women now face a difficult choice: investing years into building a career or stepping away from that path to raise children. While some successfully balance both, many find the expectations exhausting. Society often expects women to be successful professionals, devoted mothers, supportive partners, and emotionally available caregivers all at once. The pressure can become overwhelming. In many countries, women who want children are delaying motherhood because they want financial security or career stability first. Others decide that the sacrifices required are simply not worth it. This does not mean people value family less. Instead, it means individuals now have the ability to evaluate different paths and choose the one that aligns with their personal goals. The decline in birth rates is partly the result of increased freedom. When people are given more choices, they naturally make more diverse decisions. Some choose parenthood. Others choose different forms of fulfillment. Beyond economics and changing gender roles, there is another powerful factor influencing this trend: the transformation of personal identity. Modern society increasingly emphasizes individual happiness, self-development, and personal freedom. People are encouraged to discover themselves, pursue passions, travel, build careers, and create lives based on their own desires. For many, having children represents a beautiful and meaningful experience. But for others, it represents a significant limitation on the independence they have worked hard to achieve. Parenthood requires sacrifice. It changes schedules, priorities, relationships, finances, and personal freedom. The spontaneous lifestyle many young adults value becomes much more difficult with children. Traveling becomes complicated. Career changes become riskier. Quiet time becomes rare. Personal goals often have to be adjusted around another person's needs. Previous generations accepted these sacrifices because parenthood was seen as the natural purpose of adulthood. But modern generations are increasingly asking whether sacrificing personal freedom is necessary for a meaningful life. They have access to more entertainment, experiences, and opportunities than any generation before them. They can build friendships, pursue careers, explore interests, and create identities without necessarily becoming parents. The result is a fundamental shift in how people define a successful life. For some, success means raising a family. For others, it means freedom, creativity, adventure, or personal achievement. The idea that everyone must follow the same path is disappearing, and with it, the assumption that everyone will eventually want children. Another major reason behind declining birth rates is a growing uncertainty about the future itself. Previous generations often looked ahead with a sense of optimism. They believed their children would inherit a world that was more prosperous, stable, and advanced than the one they were born into. But many young adults today have a very different perception. They are entering adulthood during a period marked by economic instability, political division, climate concerns, rapid technological change, and increasing global uncertainty. For some, the decision not to have children comes from a fear that the world they would bring a child into may be more difficult than the one they experienced themselves. Concerns about climate change are especially influential among younger generations. Many worry about rising temperatures, environmental destruction, resource shortages, and the possibility of future instability caused by ecological challenges. Others worry about artificial intelligence replacing jobs, increasing inequality, geopolitical conflicts, and whether future generations will enjoy the same opportunities that previous generations had. This mindset represents a major psychological shift. Having children has always involved uncertainty, but historically, people often believed the future would improve despite challenges. Today, some people see the future as unpredictable or even threatening. They question whether creating a new life in such an uncertain environment is responsible. This does not mean everyone believes the future is hopeless. Many parents remain deeply optimistic and find meaning in raising children despite challenges. But the fact that so many people are questioning parenthood reveals something important. The decision to have children is no longer driven only by tradition. It is now influenced by how people perceive the world around them and whether they believe the future is a place worth bringing someone into. Technology has also changed the way people experience relationships, intimacy, and companionship. Throughout most of human history, forming a family was deeply connected to survival. People needed close communities, partnerships, and cooperation. But modern technology has created alternatives that did not exist before. People can communicate instantly with thousands of others, access unlimited entertainment, and build fulfilling lives without necessarily relying on traditional family structures. Dating apps have transformed how people meet and choose partners. Social media has changed how relationships are formed and maintained. Entertainment platforms provide endless sources of stimulation and connection. While these technologies have created incredible opportunities, they have also changed human behavior in ways we are still trying to understand. Some people find relationships more difficult in a world where endless options create uncertainty. Others become comfortable with independent lifestyles where they can meet many emotional and social needs without building traditional families. This does not mean technology has destroyed relationships, but it has changed the environment in which relationships develop. In previous generations, marriage and children were often central parts of adult identity. Today, people have countless alternative paths. Someone can live alone, maintain friendships, pursue a career, travel, create art, build businesses, and find meaning in ways that do not involve parenthood. As the number of available life paths increases, fewer people automatically choose the traditional one. The decline in childbirth is therefore partly connected to a broader transformation. Humans now have more ways to create meaningful lives than ever before. Another overlooked factor is the changing perception of childhood itself. Parenting has become significantly more demanding because society's expectations have increased. In previous generations, children often had more independence. They played outside unsupervised, explored their neighborhoods, and experienced more freedom. Today, many parents feel enormous pressure to constantly monitor, educate, and optimize their children's development. The rise of intensive parenting has created a culture where parents feel responsible for every aspect of their child's future. They worry about choosing the right school, providing enough activities, preventing emotional struggles, and preparing their children for an increasingly competitive world. This pressure can make parenthood feel less like a natural part of life and more like an impossible responsibility requiring constant effort and perfection. Many potential parents look at the expectations placed on modern mothers and fathers and wonder whether they are prepared for such a demanding role. They see exhausted parents struggling to balance work, finances, relationships, and childcare, and they question whether they want to enter that lifestyle. Ironically, as society has become more focused on child well-being, raising children has become more psychologically demanding. The standard of parenting has risen so dramatically that some people conclude they cannot meet it. Rather than becoming parents and feeling like they failed, they decide not to become parents at all. The decision often comes not from a lack of love for children, but from an awareness of how difficult modern parenthood has become. There is also a growing recognition that parenthood is not the only source of meaning in life. For thousands of years, family was often the central purpose around which people organized their existence. But modern societies have expanded the ways individuals can find fulfillment. People can dedicate themselves to careers, scientific discoveries, creative projects, communities, friendships, humanitarian causes, or personal growth. A person can leave a meaningful legacy without having biological children. This idea would have been difficult for many previous generations to imagine because family lineage was one of the primary ways people understood their place in history. Today, identity is much more flexible. People are encouraged to define themselves through their passions, achievements, and values rather than only through their roles within a family. This shift has created a world where parenthood is viewed as one meaningful option among many rather than the default purpose of adulthood. For some, raising children remains the most rewarding experience imaginable. For others, fulfillment comes from completely different paths. Neither choice is inherently superior. The important difference is that modern societies increasingly allow people to make that choice. The decline in birth rates is therefore partly a consequence of freedom itself. When people are no longer pressured to follow one specific life script, many discover that their ideal future looks different from what previous generations expected. However, the decline in childbirth has created serious challenges that governments and societies are now beginning to confront. An aging population creates economic pressure because fewer working-age people are supporting a larger retired population. Pension systems become more difficult to maintain. Healthcare costs increase as societies age. Businesses face labor shortages. Entire communities can shrink as younger generations become smaller than those before them. Countries like Japan, South Korea, and several European nations have already experienced the effects of long-term population decline. Some governments have responded with financial incentives, offering payments, childcare support, and policies designed to make parenting easier. Yet these programs have had limited success because they often address only one part of a much larger cultural transformation. Money matters, but it is not the only reason people are choosing fewer children. A person who does not want children because of lifestyle preferences, concerns about the future, or changing values may not change their mind because of a government payment. The challenge facing societies is that declining birth rates are not caused by one simple problem. They are the result of decades of economic, technological, and cultural changes happening simultaneously. Solving the issue requires understanding why people feel the way they do rather than simply trying to convince them to make different choices. The question is not just, why aren't people having children? The deeper question is, what has changed about modern life that makes parenthood feel less desirable than it once did? One of the most interesting aspects of declining birth rates is that it reveals a contradiction at the heart of modern society. Humanity has reached a point where people have more freedom, more technology, more comfort, and more opportunities than any previous generation. Yet despite these advancements, many people feel less prepared and less willing to start families. This seems paradoxical. If society is wealthier and more advanced, shouldn't having children become easier? In reality, progress has changed what people expect from life. Previous generations often focused on survival, stability, and providing basic necessities. Modern generations have higher expectations. They want emotional fulfillment, financial security, meaningful careers, personal freedom, and a strong sense of identity. These are positive developments, but they also make major life decisions more complicated. Having children is no longer simply about continuing a family line or fulfilling a social expectation. It requires people to evaluate whether parenthood aligns with their carefully constructed vision of happiness. In a world where individuals have countless choices, every decision carries an opportunity cost. Choosing one path means sacrificing another. Someone who chooses children may sacrifice career flexibility, financial freedom, or personal independence. Someone who chooses not to have children may sacrifice the unique experiences and relationships that come with raising a family. The modern world has not eliminated difficult choices. It has simply created more of them. The decline in parenthood is therefore not necessarily evidence that people value family less. It may instead show that people are thinking more deeply about what kind of life they want and whether traditional expectations truly match their personal goals. Another factor influencing the decision to have fewer children is the changing economic reality of adulthood. The traditional timeline of life has been delayed. Many people are spending more years in education, entering stable careers later, and facing financial challenges that previous generations encountered at younger ages. In the past, someone could often graduate, find employment, buy a home, and start a family within a relatively short period. Today, those milestones may happen much later, if they happen at all. The combination of expensive housing, uncertain employment, and rising living costs creates a feeling that adulthood is constantly being postponed. Many people do not feel ready to become parents because they do not feel they have reached the stability they associate with raising children. This creates a cycle. People delay having children while waiting for better financial circumstances, but as they get older, the challenges become more complicated. Some eventually decide not to have children at all. Others have fewer children than previous generations because starting later naturally reduces the amount of time available. This pattern can be seen across many developed nations where education levels, urbanization, and living costs have increased. The decision to have fewer children is often not made because people dislike the idea of family. It is frequently a response to an environment where achieving the traditional markers of adulthood has become increasingly difficult. When people feel uncertain about their own future, they naturally hesitate before taking responsibility for another person's future. The rise of individualism has also transformed the emotional meaning of parenthood. In many traditional societies, identity was closely connected to roles within the family and community. People understood themselves as parents, children, workers, neighbors, and members of larger groups. Modern societies place much greater emphasis on individual identity. People are encouraged to discover who they are, pursue personal passions, and create lives that reflect their unique values. This shift has allowed millions of people to live more authentic lives, but it has also changed how they view sacrifice. Parenthood requires placing another person's needs above your own for many years. That sacrifice can be deeply meaningful, but it is also demanding. In previous generations, sacrifice was often considered an expected part of adulthood. Today, many people question whether sacrifice automatically creates meaning. They ask whether a fulfilling life must involve giving up personal goals for the sake of future generations. The answers vary dramatically depending on personal values. Some people discover their greatest purpose through raising children. Others discover it through creative work, relationships, exploration, or service to society. The important change is that there is no longer one universally accepted definition of a successful life. Parenthood has moved from being a social expectation to being a personal choice. This transformation represents one of the biggest philosophical changes in modern history. For the first time, large numbers of people have the ability to seriously consider whether becoming a parent is something they genuinely desire rather than something they are simply expected to do. Despite concerns about declining birth rates, there are also arguments that a smaller population could create unexpected benefits. Fewer people can mean reduced pressure on resources, less environmental impact, and opportunities for societies to focus more on quality of life rather than endless growth. Some economists argue that automation and artificial intelligence could eventually compensate for smaller workforces by increasing productivity. A society with fewer children does not automatically have to become a weaker society. The challenge is adapting institutions designed for a different demographic reality. Retirement systems, healthcare models, education systems, and economic structures were often built around the assumption of continuous population growth. As that assumption changes, societies will need to rethink how they function. The future may involve older people working longer, increased automation, new forms of caregiving, and different approaches to community support. While population decline presents serious challenges, it also forces humanity to reconsider outdated assumptions. The goal may no longer be maximizing population size at all costs, but creating societies where people can live healthy, meaningful lives regardless of demographic trends. A smaller population could potentially lead to a different kind of prosperity, one measured less by constant expansion and more by sustainability, quality, and human well-being. Ultimately, the question of why nobody wants to have kids anymore does not have one simple answer. People are not avoiding parenthood because of a single problem. The decision reflects a combination of economics, technology, culture, personal freedom, changing expectations, and uncertainty about the future. For some, children remain the greatest source of meaning and happiness imaginable. For others, a fulfilling life exists outside of parenthood. Both perspectives represent the reality of a changing world. What is undeniable is that humanity is entering a new era where having children is no longer an automatic milestone, but a carefully considered choice. This shift will reshape societies in ways we are only beginning to understand. It will influence economies, communities, relationships, and the way future generations define adulthood itself. The decline in birth rates is not simply a story about fewer babies being born. It is a story about changing human priorities. It reveals what people fear, what they value, and what they believe is necessary for a meaningful life. The future of humanity may not depend only on how many children are born, but on whether societies can create a world where people feel hopeful enough, supported enough, and secure enough to choose parenthood when they truly want it. Because ultimately, the question is not just why people are having fewer children. The deeper question is whether modern society has created a future that people still feel excited to pass on.